The morning sun painted the sky orange over New Haven Colony. Jake Morrison stood on his porch, coffee cup in hand, watching his daughter Amy walk down the dirt path toward the small school building. She carried her worn backpack and waved at him before disappearing around the corner. At 16, she was growing up fast, but to Jake, she would always be his little girl. Jake had lived on New Haven for 15 years now. It was a quiet farming world, far from the busy space lanes and big cities. Most people here grew wheat or raised cattle. The air was clean, the neighbors were friendly, and nobody asked too many questions about your past. That was exactly what Jake wanted. He finished his coffee and walked to the small hangar behind his house. The transport ship Wanderer sat there, old but reliable. Jake ran a small cargo business, moving supplies between the farming settlements. It was honest work, and it kept food on the table. More importantly, it was peaceful. Jake had not always been peaceful. But that was a long time ago in a different life. Now he was just a single father, trying to raise his daughter right. He spent the morning checking the ship's engines. The Wanderer was not much to look at, but Jake kept her in perfect condition. He had learned long ago that your ship could mean the difference between life and death. Old habits were hard to break. Around noon, Jake heard footsteps on the gravel outside. He looked up to see his neighbor, Tom Parker, walking toward the hangar. Tom was a wheat farmer, a good man who had helped Jake and Amy settle in when they first arrived. "Morning, Jake," Tom said. "Got a shipment of grain that needs to go to Millfield Settlement. You free this afternoon?"
"Sure thing,"
Jake replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "How much cargo?" "About 2 tons. Nothing fancy, just basic grain for their food stores." Jake nodded. "I can have it there by evening. Standard rate." Tom smiled. "Appreciate it. Your girl doing well in school?" "Amy loves it there. She has been helping teach the younger kids how to read, so that is good to hear. She is a smart one, just like her father." Jake felt a small knot in his stomach. He hoped Amy was nothing like her father, not the man he used to be anyway. After Tom left, Jake went inside to prepare lunch. Their house was small but comfortable. Amy had decorated her room with pictures of distant worlds she had seen in books. She dreamed of traveling to the big cities someday, seeing the galaxy beyond New Haven. Jake hoped she would be happy staying here forever. Amy came home from school at 3 o'clock, full of energy and stories about her day. She sat at the kitchen table while Jake made her a sandwich. "Mr. Davis brought his old computer to school today," she said. "He showed us pictures of the capital worlds. Dad, they have buildings that touch the clouds and ships bigger than our whole town." Jake smiled. "Sounds impressive. Have you ever been to places like that?" The question caught Jake off guard. He had been to many places Amy could not imagine. Space stations filled with criminals and soldiers. Battleships that could destroy entire planets. Worlds where the sky was always dark and the air tasted like metal. "I traveled some when I was young," he said carefully, "but I like it better here." Amy took a bite of her sandwich. "Maybe someday we could visit one of those places. Just to see what it is like," maybe Jake said, but he did not mean it. The galaxy was dangerous, full of people who would hurt a sweet girl like Amy without thinking twice. New Haven was safe. It was home. That evening, Jake flew the grain shipment to Millfield. The trip took 2 hours through the peaceful countryside. Rolling hills covered with golden wheat stretched to the horizon. 2 small moons hung in the purple sky. It was beautiful and calm. When he returned home, Amy was doing her homework at the kitchen table. She looked up and smiled when he walked in. "How was the delivery?" she asked. "Easy run." "How was your afternoon?" "Good, I helped some of the little kids with their reading. There is this one boy, Danny, who is having trouble with his letters. But I think I am making progress with him." Jake felt proud. Amy had grown up to be kind and patient, nothing like the hard man who had raised her. Sometimes he wondered what her mother would think of the woman Amy was becoming. But Amy's mother had died when she was just a baby, and Jake had been alone ever since. They ate dinner together, talking about small things. Amy told him about her plans to expand the school garden. Jake listened and nodded, enjoying the sound of her voice. These quiet moments were precious to him. After dinner, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The night was warm and peaceful. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called to its mate. "Dad," Amy said quietly, "do you ever miss your old life?" Jake looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, before we came here, before I was born. You never talk about it." Jake was quiet for a long moment. How could he explain that his old life had been filled with violence and death? That he had done things that would give her nightmares? That he had been known across the galaxy as one of the most dangerous men alive? "I had a different job then," he said finally. "I traveled a lot. It was lonely. When you came along, I realized I wanted something better, something real." Amy leaned against his shoulder. "I am glad you chose this life." "Me too, sweetheart, me too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Jake put his arm around his daughter and felt the peace that had taken him years to find. New Haven had given him something he had never expected to have: a family, a home, a reason to be better than he used to be. The next morning started like any other. Jake made breakfast while Amy got ready for school. She kissed his cheek and headed out the door, calling back that she would be home by 4 o'clock. Jake spent the morning working on the ship again. The Wanderer needed new engine seals, and he wanted to replace them before the next big cargo run. He was deep under the engine housing when he heard someone running up the path. He slid out from under the ship and saw Tom Parker approaching it. A dead run. Tom's face was white with fear. "Jake," Tom gasped, trying to catch his breath. "You need to come quick. Something happened at the school." Jake felt ice in his veins. What kind of something? There was an attack. Strangers with weapons. They took some of the children. Jake was already moving toward the house. Was Amy there? "I do not know. Sheriff Davis is at the school now. But Jake, there are scorch marks on the walls." Energy weapons. Jake stopped dead. Energy weapons were not something farmers used. They were military grade, expensive, and illegal on most colony worlds. Only serious criminals or soldiers carried them. He ran to the house and grabbed his coat. Under the floor in his bedroom was a hidden compartment. Inside was a small pistol, the only weapon he had kept from his old life. He strapped it under his jacket and headed for the door. The ride to the school felt like forever. Jake's mind raced with possibilities, all of them bad. When they arrived, he saw Sheriff Davis standing outside the small building, talking to a group of parents. The sheriff looked lost and scared. Jake walked up to them. "Where's my daughter?" Sheriff Davis looked at him with sad eyes. "Jake, I am sorry. Amy was here when it happened. She is gone." The world seemed to stop. Jake felt something cold and dark rising in his chest, something he had buried deep 15 years ago. He looked at the building and saw the scorch marks Tom had mentioned. Professional work, clean and efficient. "Who did this?" Jake asked quietly. "We do not know yet." But Jake, these were not ordinary criminals. They knew exactly what they were doing. Jake walked to the spot where the attack had happened. In the dirt, he found a piece of blue fabric from Amy's favorite dress. Next to it, almost invisible, was a single alien hair. Long, silver, and sharp at the end. Zephyrian. Jake's blood turned to ice. The Zephyrians were slavers, among the worst criminals in the galaxy. They took people and sold them to the highest. Bitter. And somehow, they had found his quiet little world. Jake stood up slowly. The man who had lived peacefully on New Haven for 15 years was gone. In his place stood someone much older and infinitely more dangerous. The Reaper had work to do. Sheriff Davis tried his best, but Jake could see the man was lost. The sheriff had spent his whole career dealing with stolen livestock and bar fights. He had never seen energy weapons before, let alone alien slavers. "You should contact the planetary authorities," Davis said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "They will know what to do." Jake knelt down and picked up the silver hair again. Under the light, he could see the microscopic barbs that marked it as Zephyrian. These aliens were professionals. They did not take people by accident. "How long will that take?" Jake asked. "Well, we need to send a message through the communication array, then wait for a response. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe more. 2 weeks. Jake felt his jaw tighten. In 2 weeks, Amy could be sold to buyers anywhere. In the galaxy, she could disappear forever. What about the other children? Jake asked. Davis looked relieved to have something easier to answer. They only took 3. Amy, little Danny Miller, and Susan Wright. Left the rest behind. Jake thought about this. Slavers usually took everyone they could carry. Why only 3 children? And why those 3 specifically? Danny was 7 years old, small and quiet. Susan was 14, the daughter of a shopkeeper. Amy was 16, and the smartest student in school. Something was wrong with this picture. Jake spent the rest of the day at the school, looking for clues the sheriff had missed. He found boot prints in the soft earth behind the building. Military-grade boots, size 10 and 11. At least 3 attackers, maybe 4. They had come from the north through the wheat fields where no one would see them. The attack had been fast and clean. No extra violence, no property damage beyond what was necessary. The children had been taken alive and unharmed. This was not random violence. This was business. That night, Jake sat alone in his kitchen, staring at the silver hair. He had not seen one of these in 15 years, but he remembered everything about the creatures that grew them. Zephyrians were tall, thin humanoids with silver skin and no hair except for the long strands that grew from their skulls. They were smart, ruthless, and they viewed other species as property to be bought and sold. During the war, Jake had killed dozens of them. The war. Jake closed his eyes and tried not to remember, but the memories came anyway. Burning ships in deep space. Alien worlds where the sky was always red. The sound his plasma rifle made when it cut through enemy armor. The way his hands had stopped. Shaking after the first 100 kills, he had been good at killing. It's too good. That was why they called him the Reaper. Jake opened his eyes and looked around his small kitchen. Amy's homework was still on the table where she had left it. Her coffee cup sat by the sink unwashed. Everything reminded him of the life they had built together. The life that was now broken. He made a decision. Jake went to his bedroom and rolled back the small rug beside his bed. Underneath was a section of floorboard that looked like all the others, but when he pressed it in the right place, it clicked open. Inside was a space just big enough for a man to hide important things. The pistol came out first. It was small and silver, designed to be hidden. Jake had carried it for 3 years during the war, and it had never failed him. Beside it was a small device that looked like a coin, communication chip, heavily encrypted and very illegal. At the bottom of the space was something Jake had hoped never to touch again, a black case, no bigger than a book. Inside was a single item, a military ID chip. Not his real name, not his colony identity, but the name the galaxy had learned to fear. Jake held the chip in his palm and remembered what it felt like to be someone else, someone dangerous. He walked to the kitchen and activated the communication device. It took several minutes to establish a connection, bouncing signals off relay stations across 3 star systems. Finally, a voice answered. "This is a restricted channel. Identify yourself." "Reaper 77 Delta," Jake said quietly. "Emergency authentication." There was a long pause. Then a different voice came on the line, older and more careful. "Jake, is that really you?" "Hello, Carol." Carol Hayes had been his handler during the war. She had sent him on missions that other operatives could not complete. She had also been the one to approve his retirement request 15 years ago. "I thought you were dead," she said. "You dropped off the grid completely. I wanted it that way, but I need help now." Jake told her about Amy, about the attack, about the silver hair. Carol listened without interrupting. "Zephyrians on a colony world," she said when he finished. "That is unusual. They usually stick to the trade routes. Can you track them?" "Maybe. But Jake, if you come out of retirement, there will be consequences. A lot of people want you dead. Some of them are in positions of power now." Jake looked at Amy's homework on the table. "I do not care about consequences. I know you don't. That was always your problem." Carol was quiet for a moment. "There is a man you should talk to. Ben Clark. He runs a small mercenary company now. Operates out of the Rim worlds. If anyone knows where Zephyrian slavers are selling their cargo, it would be him. Ben Clark. Jake remembered him as a young sergeant, eager and brave. They'd served together on 3 missions before Jake retired. Yeah. Do I reach him? I will send you his contact information. But Jake, be careful. The galaxy has changed since you left. There are new players, new rules. Some of the old enemies are still around, and they have long memories. The connection ended. 8. Jake sat in his kitchen, holding the communication device. In the space of 1 day, his quiet life had been shattered. There was no going back now. He spent the next hour preparing. The Wanderer would need modifications for the journey ahead. Weapons, shields, long-range sensors. Jake knew where to get these things, but it would mean visiting places he had hoped never to see again. The most important preparation was mental. Jake sat on his porch and let himself remember what it felt like to be the Reaper. The cold focus. That came over him before a mission. The way his mind worked when survival was the only thing that mattered. The part of himself that could kill without hesitation or regret, it was like putting on an old coat that still fit perfectly. The next morning, Jake visited Sheriff Davis one more time. The sheriff was in his office, looking overwhelmed by reports and forms. Any word from the planetary authorities? Jake asked. Davis shook his head. Not yet, but I am sure they will respond soon. Jake nodded. I am going to look for Amy myself. Jake, that is not safe. These are dangerous criminals. You should wait for the professionals. I am a professional. Something in Jake's voice made the sheriff look up sharply. For a moment, Davis saw something in Jake's eyes that made him take a step backward. What kind of professional? Davis asked quietly. The kind that gets results. Jake left the sheriff's office and walked to the small store where Tom Parker was buying supplies. Tom saw him coming and smiled, but the smile faded when he saw Jake's expression. Jake, you look different. I am leaving New Haven, Jake said. I am going to find Amy. But the authorities. ... Double quotes, the authorities will take too long. Amy does not have that much time. Tom studied his friend's face. After 15 years, he thought he knew Jake Morrison pretty well. But the man standing in front of him seemed like a stranger. Colder, harder, more dangerous. Is there anything I can do to help? Tom asked. Watch my house while I am gone. If anyone comes asking about me or Amy, tell them we moved away years ago. Jake, what are not you telling me? Who are you really? Jake looked at his neighbor, this good man who had been kind to him and Amy for so many years. Tom deserved to know the truth, but the truth would only put him in danger. I am someone who should have stayed hidden, Jake said, but my daughter is more important than my secrets. That afternoon, Jake loaded supplies onto the Wanderer. Food, water, medical supplies, and several cases that he did not let anyone see. The ship felt different now, more like the War Machine. It had once been, and less like a simple cargo hauler, as the sun set over New Haven. Jake prepared to leave the only peaceful life he had ever known. Somewhere out in the galaxy, Amy was waiting for him. Somewhere out there. The people who had taken her were about to learn why the name Reaper still made hardened criminals wake up screaming. Jake Morrison was gone. In his place stood a ghost. From the war, a man who had once been the most feared human in the galaxy, and he was coming for his daughter. The journey to Kepler Station took 5 days through hyperspace. Jake used the time to prepare himself for what was coming. He practiced with his weapons until his hands remembered the weight of them. He studied maps of the station, memorizing every corridor and docking bay. Most importantly, he let his mind become cold and focused again. The Wanderer dropped out of hyperspace near a dying red star. Kepler Station hung in orbit around it, a massive structure built from scrapped ships and industrial platforms. It looked like a metal city floating in space, all sharp angles and blinking lights. This was where criminals came when they had nowhere else to go. Jake docked in the cheapest section of the station, between a rusty cargo hauler and a ship that looked like it might fall apart at any moment. The docking fee was expensive, but Jake paid without complaint. He needed to blend in. so it looked like just another desperate man looking for work or information. The station's corridors were crowded and dirty. Humans mixed with aliens of every description. Traders argued over prices in languages Jake did not recognize. Somewhere in the distance, music played from a cantina. The air smelled like fuel and unwashed bodies. Jake walked slowly through the market areas, listening to conversations and watching faces. He had changed his appearance before leaving the ship. His hair was shorter now, and he wore the kind of cheap clothes that marked him as a colonist. To anyone watching, he looked like a farmer out of his depth. But Jake was not out of his depth. He had been to places like Kepler Station before, during the war. He knew how they worked, who had power, and how to get information without attracting attention. His first stop was a small bar called the Broken Engine. It was the kind of place where spacers went to drink away their problems and forget about whatever they were running from. Jake ordered a beer and sat in a corner where he could watch the room. After an hour, he heard what he was looking for. Two men at the bar were talking about a recent slave auction. One of them mentioned Zephyrians and fresh cargo from the Rim worlds. Jake finished his beer and left the bar. He followed the two men through the station's twisting corridors, staying far enough back that they would not notice him. They led him to a warehouse in the industrial section, a place where legitimate cargo was mixed with things that were not so legitimate. The warehouse was guarded. But Jake had expected that. He spent the rest of the day watching the building, counting guards and noting their patrol patterns. That night, when the station's artificial lights dimmed to simulate evening, he made his move. Getting inside was not difficult for someone with Jake's training. The guards were expecting trouble from competitors or law enforcement, not from a single man who moved like a shadow. Jake slipped past them and into the warehouse itself. Inside, he found what he was looking for: records of recent transactions, shipping manifests, and most importantly, security footage from the slave processing area. Jake copied everything onto a small data device, working quickly and quietly. The footage showed Amy, along with Danny and Susan, being processed 3 days earlier. They looked scared but unharmed. Amy had tried to comfort the younger children, just like Jake knew she would. The sight of her face on the screen made his chest tight with anger and worry. The records showed that all 3 children had been sold to the same buyer, a human named Marcus Webb, who operated from an estate on Centauri Prime. Jake recognized the name from his war days. Webb was a collector, the kind of rich man who bought rare and exotic things to display in his private museum. Jake was copying the last of the files when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. 2 guards were making their rounds earlier than expected. Jake finished the download and moved toward the back exit, but the guards were already coming through the front door. Hey, one of them called out, "Who is in there?" Jake could have hidden and waited for them to leave. But hiding would take time, and time was something Amy did not have. Instead, Jake stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the guards. "Just looking for work," he said, trying to sound nervous. "Someone told me there might be jobs here." The first guard, a big human with scars on his face, laughed. "Jobs? This is a private warehouse, colonist. You are trespassing. I'm sorry. I will leave not so fast." The second guard, a Zephyrian with silver skin and long hair, moved to block Jake's path. "Maybe we should ask the boss what to do with you." Jake looked at the alien and felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was one of them. One of the creatures that had taken his daughter. "Please," Jake said, still playing the part of a scared farmer. "I do not want any trouble." The Zephyrian stepped closer. "Too late for that, human. You have seen too much." The alien reached for a weapon on his belt. It was his mistake. Jake moved faster than either guard expected. His hand shot out and grabbed the Zephyrion's wrist, twisting until he heard bones break. The alien screamed and dropped his weapon. Jake caught it and spun, firing twice at the human guard before the man could draw his own gun. The whole fight took less than 5 seconds. Jake stood over the 2 bodies, breathing hard. It had been 15 years since he had killed anyone, but his body remembered how to do it. The movements came as naturally as walking or breathing. He searched the bodies quickly, looking for anything useful. The Zephyrian carried a communication. device with recent messages. Most were in the alien language, but Jake could read enough to understand the basic meaning. There was going to be another auction soon, this one on a different station. Jake left the warehouse the same way he had, entered like a ghost in the night. By morning, he was back on the Wanderer, studying the information he had gathered. The trail led to Centauri Prime, one of the inner worlds where the rich and powerful lived in luxury. But first, Jake needed help. The files showed that Webb's estate was heavily defended. Getting Amy out would require more than just one man with a gun. Jake activated his communication device and sent a coded message to Ben Clark. The response came back within hours. Ben would meet him at a neutral station in 2 days. He would bring weapons and equipment, but Jake would owe him a favor in return. Jake agreed without hesitation. He would make any deal necessary to get Amy back. The flight to the meeting point gave Jake time to think about what he was becoming again. For 15 years, he had been a peaceful man, a loving father who read bedtime stories and helped with homework. Now he had killed 2 men without feeling any guilt or regret. The transformation scared him, but not as much as the thought of never seeing Amy again. Ben Clark met him at a small trading post called Haven's Rest. Jake barely recognized his old sergeant. Ben had grown older and harder, with new scars on his face and gray in his hair. But when he saw Jake, he smiled like no time had passed at all. "The Reaper," Ben said, shaking Jake's hand. "I thought you were dead." "I was, until 3 days ago." They talked in Ben's ship, away from listening ears. Jake told him about Amy, about the trail that led to Marcus Webb. Ben listened without interrupting the way he used to during mission briefings. "Webb is bad news," Ben said when Jake finished. "Connected and completely without morals. His estate is like a fortress. Getting in will not be easy."
Can it be done?
Ben smiled, and Jake saw the same eager look he remembered from the war. "It can be done, but it will not be quiet. Webb has connections with some very dangerous people. If we hit him, there will be consequences." "I told you, I do not care about consequences. I know. That is what I always liked about you." Ben stood up and walked to a wall locker. "But this time, you are not working for the military. This time, it is personal. That makes you dangerous in a different way." Ben opened the locker and pulled out a case. Inside were weapons Jake had not seen in 15 years. Military-grade plasma rifles, armor, and other equipment that was illegal on most worlds. "Like old times?" Ben asked. Jake picked up one of the rifles and felt its familiar weight. Like old times. He spent the next day planning the assault on Webb's estate. Ben had detailed maps of the compound, guard schedules, and information about Webb's private security force. It would be a difficult mission, but not impossible for 2 men who had once been the best soldiers in the galaxy, as they prepared to leave for Centauri Prime. Ben asked the question Jake had been expecting. "After we get your daughter back, what? Then, you cannot go back to your quiet life. Too many people know you are alive now." Jake looked out at the stars and thought about Amy, about the peaceful life they had built on New Haven. It was gone now, destroyed the moment the Zephyrians had taken her. There was no going back. "Then we keep moving forward," Jake said. "Whatever that means." Ben nodded. "The galaxy is going to remember why they used to fear the Reaper." Jake said nothing, but he knew Ben was right. The man who had lived peacefully on New Haven was gone forever. In his place stood someone harder and more dangerous. Someone willing to burn down the galaxy to save his daughter. Marcus Webb was about to learn what happened when you took something that belonged to the Reaper. Centauri Prime hung in space like a blue and green jewel. It was one of the richest worlds in the galaxy, home to politicians, business leaders, and criminals who had enough money to buy their way out of trouble. Marcus Webb's estate sat on a private island, surrounded by clear blue water and protected by the best security money could buy. Jake and Ben studied the compound from orbit, using long-range sensors to map every building and guard post. The estate looked like a resort, with white buildings, beautiful gardens, and a private landing pad. But Jake could see the hidden defenses: energy shields, automated turrets, and patrol boats that circled the island day and night. 40 guards. Ben said, reading from his scanner. Maybe more inside the buildings? Military-grade weapons and armor. These are not ordinary security guards. Jake zoomed in on the main house, a large white structure that overlooked the ocean. Somewhere inside that building, Amy was being held prisoner. The thought made his hands tighten on the controls. What about the other prisoners? Jake asked. Sources say Webb keeps his collection in the basement level. Reinforced cells, each one designed for a different species. He treats them like animals in a zoo. Jake felt his anger growing, but he kept his voice calm. Anger was useful, but only. If he controlled it, how do we get in? Ben pointed to a service tunnel that connected the island to the mainland. Underwater approach. You can use breathing gear and swim through the tunnel. It will put us inside the compound without triggering the perimeter alarms. What about getting out? That is the hard part. Once we start shooting, the whole place will go into lockdown. We will have to fight our way to the landing pad and steal one of Webb's ships. Jake nodded. It was not a perfect plan, but perfect plans were rare in his line of work. Sometimes you had to make do with what you could get. They spent 2 days preparing. Jake practiced with the new weapons until he could use them in his sleep. Ben gathered intelligence about Webb's daily routine and the guard rotations. They studied the compound until they knew every room and corridor. On the night of the assault, they approached the island in a small submersible that Ben had borrowed from a smuggler friend. The water was dark and cold as they swam through the service tunnel, wearing breathing gear and carrying their weapons in waterproof cases. The tunnel led to a maintenance room beneath the main house. Jake and Ben climbed out of the water and checked their equipment. Everything was dry and ready. Jake looked at his old friend and saw the same focused expression he remembered from the war. Like old times, Ben whispered. Like old times, Jake. Agreed. They moved through the basement corridors like ghosts. Jake's enhanced vision, a gift from military surgeries long ago, let him see clearly in the dark. The basement was larger than they had expected, with dozens of rooms and passages. They found the prison cells in the deepest part of the building. Each cell was different, designed to hold a specific type of alien. Some were filled with water. For aquatic species, others had different atmosphere mixtures or gravity fields. Webb had spent a fortune creating his private zoo. In the third cell, they checked. Jake found them. Amy sat on a simple bed, holding Danny Miller in her arms. The little boy was sleeping, but Amy was awake, staring at the door with the kind of watchful expression that broke Jake's heart. Susan Wright sat in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest. When Amy saw Jake through the cell's transparent wall, her eyes went wide with shock and relief. "Dad," she whispered. Jake placed his hand against the wall and smiled at his daughter. "I am here, sweetheart. I am going to get you out." Ben was already working on the cell's electronic lock. His fingers moved quickly over the control panel, bypassing the security systems with tools he had brought for this purpose. The lock clicked open, and Jake stepped inside. Amy threw herself into his arms. And for a moment, Jake forgot about everything else. He held his daughter close, feeling her heart beat against his chest. She was alive. She was safe. Everything else could wait. "How did you find us?" Amy asked. "I will explain later. Right now we need to leave." Jake looked at the other children. Danny was still asleep, exhausted by fear and stress. Susan looked at Jake with hope and terror mixed in her eyes. "Can you walk?" Jake asked her. Susan nodded. "You really here to rescue us?" "Yes, but you need to stay close and do exactly what I say." Ben appeared in the doorway. "We have a problem. Motion sensors just activated on the upper levels. They know we are here." Jake picked up Danny in his arms. The boy woke up and looked confused, but Amy quickly whispered in his ear to stay quiet. Jake handed his spare pistol to Amy. "Do you remember what I taught you about guns?" he asked. Amy looked surprised. "You never taught me about guns. I taught you about everything else. Guns work on the same principle as the plasma torch in our workshop: point, aim, pull the trigger. Only use it if someone tries to hurt you." Amy took the weapon with shaking hands. Jake could see that she was scared, but also determined. His daughter was braver than he had given her credit for. They moved through the basement corridors toward the exit. But alarms were already sounding throughout the building. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, and Jake could hear boots running on the floors above them. Service elevator, Ben said, pointing to a shaft that led upward. It will take us to the ground floor. The elevator ride seemed to last forever. Jake held Danny while Amy and Susan stood close together, both girls trying to be brave. Ben watched the floor indicator, his rifle ready. The doors opened to chaos. Webb's security force was everywhere, running through the corridors and sealing exits. They were dressed in black combat armor and carried military weapons. These were not ordinary guards. They were professional soldiers. Jake stepped out of the elevator first, his rifle already firing. The plasma bolts cut through the air like lightning, striking down 3 guards before they could react. Ben was right behind him, covering their rear as they moved toward the main exit. "This way," Jake called, leading the group through a corridor lined with expensive artwork. Paintings and sculptures worth millions of credits were destroyed as energy bolts flew back and forth. A guard appeared around a corner, his weapon aimed at Amy. Jake moved without thinking, putting himself between the gun and his daughter. Guard's shot hit Jake in the shoulder, spinning him around, but Jake's return fire was more accurate. The guard fell. "Dad." Amy cried out. "I am fine," Jake said, though his shoulder burned with pain. "Keep moving." They reached the main lobby, a huge room with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. At least 20 guards were waiting for them, positioned behind cover and ready for a fight. "Surrender now," one of them called out. "You are outnumbered." Jake looked at the guards, then at his daughter and the other children. For a moment, he felt like the peaceful farmer he had been just a week ago. These were someone's sons and daughters, people with families and dreams. Then he remembered Amy's face when he found her in that cell. The peaceful farmer disappeared forever. "Ben," Jake said quietly, "take the children and get to the landing." "Pad, I will handle this, Jake. There are too many of them." "No," Jake said, and his voice was cold as winter. "Or not enough." What happened next became legend among the criminal underworld of the galaxy. Jake Morrison moved through that lobby like death itself, his weapons cutting down anyone who stood between him and his daughter's freedom. The guards were well trained and well equipped, but they had never faced anyone like the Reaper. When the shooting stopped, 20 guards lay dead, and Jake stood among them without a scratch, except for the wound on his shoulder. The marble floor was scorched black with energy burns. The expensive decorations lay in ruins. Jake found Marcus Webb cowering in his office, a thin man with expensive clothes and fear in his eyes. "Please," Webb begged, "I can pay you. Whatever you want. Money, ships, information." Jake looked at this man who bought and sold people like property. "You took my daughter. I did not know. If I had known who you were, I never would have. ... Too late." Jake's rifle fired once, and Marcus Webb would never hurt another child again. Outside, Ben had secured one of Webb's luxury ships and was helping the children aboard. Amy ran to Jake when she saw him coming across the landing pad. "Is it over?" she asked. Jake looked back at the burning compound, then at his daughter's face. The innocent girl who had lived peacefully on New Haven was gone, replaced by someone who had seen too much violence and pain. But she was alive, and she was free, and that was all that mattered. "It is over," Jake said, though he knew it was not really true. As they lifted off into the night sky, Jake held his daughter close and tried not to think about what came next. The galaxy would know that the Reaper had returned, and there would be consequences for what he had done tonight. But Amy was safe, and for now, that was enough. The news traveled fast across the galaxy. Within hours of the assault on Webb's estate, every major news network was running the story. "Massacre on Centauri Prime" read the headlines. "Unknown terrorist kills dozens," said another. Security footage from the compound showed a single man moving through trained soldiers like they were children. Jake watched the reports from the stolen ship as they traveled through hyperspace. The news anchors called him a criminal, a terrorist, a madman. They showed pictures of the destroyed lobby and interviewed experts who said no ordinary human could have done such damage alone. Amy sat beside him, staring at the screen with wide eyes. She had not said much since they escaped the compound. The little girl who used to dream about visiting the big cities was gone, replaced by someone who had seen her father kill 20 men without blinking.
Dad,
She said quietly. Who? Are you really? Jake turned off the news feed and looked at his daughter. She deserved to know the truth, all of it. During the war, I was a special operative, he began. My job was to do missions that other soldiers could not complete. I was very good at killing people. How many people? Jake was quiet for a long moment, too many to count. Amy nodded, like this confirmed something she had already suspected. And they called you the Reaper? Yes. Why did you stop? It's because I met your mother. She made me want to be a better man. When she died and you were born, I realized I had a choice. I could keep being a killer, or I could try to be a father. Amy leaned against his shoulder. You were a good father? I tried to be. But Amy, we can never go back to New Haven now. Too many people know who I am. It would not be safe. In the ship's cargo bay, Danny and Susan were sleeping on makeshift beds that Ben had prepared. The children were traumatized, but alive. Ben had already contacted their families, who were making arrangements to pick them up at a neutral station. Ben walked into the cockpit and sat down across from Jake and Amy. His face was serious. We have a problem, he said. Just got word from my contacts. The Galactic Council has issued warrants for our arrest. They are calling what we did an act of terrorism. Jake was not surprised. What else? Bounty hunters are already mobilizing. The Zephyrian Empire has put a 10 million credit price on your head. Some of the big crime syndicates are offering even more. Amy looked confused. But we were rescuing kidnapped children. Why are we the criminals? Ben and Jake exchanged glances. How do you explain galactic politics to a 16-year-old girl? Webb had connections, Ben said carefully. Important people who protected him in exchange for favors. When we killed him, we embarrassed some very powerful individuals. That's not fair. No, Jake agreed. It is not fair. But that is how the galaxy works. Over the next 3 days, more news came in. The story was growing larger and more complicated. Some reports claimed that Jake was working for a rebel organization trying to overthrow the government. Others said he was an agent of a foreign power. A few news outlets tried to report the truth about Webb's crimes, but they were quickly silenced. The most disturbing news came from Carol Hayes. She contacted Jake through an encrypted channel, her voice tight with worry. Jake, you need to know what you have stepped into, she said. Webb was not just a collector. He was part of a larger conspiracy involving people in the Trade Federation and the Zephyrian government. What kind of conspiracy? They have been planning to restart the war between humans and Zephyrians. They needed an incident, something that would justify military action. Your attack on Webb's compound gave them exactly what they wanted. Jake felt his blood turn cold. They used Amy as bait. It looks that way. They knew who you were, Jake. They knew you would come for her. They counted on you being the Reaper again. Amy was listening to the conversation, her face growing pale. They took me to start a war? We think so, Carol said. The Trade Federation has been looking for an excuse to expand into Zephyrian space. A war hero turned terrorist gives them the perfect story. Jake looked at his daughter and felt rage building in his chest. These people had not just kidnapped Amy. They had used her as a weapon against him, and now they were using his response as a weapon against the galaxy. Who is behind it? He asked. Carol sent him a list of names: politicians, business leaders, and military officers from both human and Zephyrian governments. People who would profit from a war and did not care how many innocents died to make it happen. What do you want to do? Ben asked when the call ended. Jake studied the list of names. These were powerful people, protected by armies and wealth. Killing them would not be easy. But more importantly, killing them might not solve the problem. I want to expose them, Jake said. Show the galaxy what they really are. That could be dangerous. These people have resources we can barely imagine, more dangerous than letting them start a war. Amy spoke up from her seat. Dad, what if we could prove what they did? Show people the truth about why they took me. Jake looked at his daughter. With new respect, even after everything she had been through, She was thinking clearly. How do we do that? Kept records, Amy said. When they brought me to his estate, I heard him talking to someone on a communication device. He was bragging about his part in some larger plan. There might be evidence in his files. Ben nodded slowly. The estate is probably crawling with investigators now. But if we could get to Webb's personal files before they are destroyed, ... it would be suicide, Jake said. The place will be surrounded, maybe. But if we can prove the conspiracy, it might save millions of lives. Jake thought about this. Going back to Centauri Prime would mean walking into a trap. Every law enforcement agency in the galaxy would be looking for them. The chances of survival were small, but the alternative was letting the conspirators win, letting them use Amy's kidnapping to justify a war that would destroy entire worlds. There is something else, Amy said quietly. When I was in that cell, I met some of Webb's other prisoners. One of them was a Zephyrian diplomat named Kess. She told me that her own government was involved in the conspiracy. There are people on both sides who want this war. Jake made his decision. Ben, can you get Danny and Susan to their families safely? Of course. But what about you and Amy? We are going back to Centauri Prime. Amy straightened in her seat. Dad, I want to help. Absolutely not. This is too dangerous. They used me to start this. I should help finish it. Jake looked at his daughter and saw something that reminded him of her mother. Stubborn determination that would not be swayed by arguments or threats. Amy, these people have already hurt you once. I will not let them do it again. And I will not let them hurt other families the way they hurt us. Ben smiled. She is definitely your daughter, Jake. After much discussion, they agreed on a plan. Ben would take Danny and Susan to safety, then meet Jake and Amy at a rendezvous point near Centauri Prime. They would infiltrate Webb's estate one more time, gather evidence of the conspiracy, and broadcast it to every news network in the galaxy. It was not a perfect plan. The chances of success were small, and the risks were enormous. But sometimes, Jake realized, you had to take a stand against the darkness, even if it cost you everything. 3 days later, they dropped out of hyperspace near Centauri Prime. The planet looked different now, surrounded by warships from both human and Zephyrian fleets. The conspiracy was already working, using Jake's actions to justify military buildup on both sides. Are you ready? Jake asked his daughter. Amy checked her equipment one more time. She wore light armor and carried a small pistol, looking more like a soldier than the schoolgirl she had been just 2 weeks ago. I am ready, she said. Jake activated the ship's stealth systems and began their approach to the planet. Somewhere below, the evidence they needed was waiting. Somewhere below, the people who had destroyed their peaceful life were celebrating their success. But the Reaper was coming for them. And this time, he was not alone. The war they wanted so badly was about to begin, but it would not be the war they expected. It would be a war between truth and lies, between justice and corruption. And Jake Morrison was going to make sure the right side won.